Richard, thank you for coming out and voting. We don't know either.
Bob,
They're still counting.
John Barrisage, Joe. It's all the usual suspects? Yeah. Have they been certified yet?
Who? They should have certified last Friday. I have not received our copy yet. You guys have to have it in your consent agenda for the next meeting. You don't do anything with it. You just it just needs to be in the minute. But yes, the results are official.
I was like, who are in this other people though? Michael Cummings?
He's not.
And before we officially get started, we still have to adopt the agenda. The agenda is just,
You need to call me in the order and go through
I
that.
have this whole thing. We're not reviewing,
Just make sure your mic's on.
but we're not reviewing, not approving minutes.
You are on the agenda. That's the only order of business. You have all your procedural motions.
Where am I supposed to put these then?
How we doing?
I'm like, who's that? Hello, Will. Is that Will? I thought that was Indiana Jones. I wasn't sure what was happening. Indy's here. All right. You can get set up and start. Does that work for you? Is that okay? All right. So I'd like to call the Marvin Planning Board meeting of Tuesday, November 21st to order. We have a quorum. We are currently only missing Michael Lavelle. Everyone else is here. Could we get a motion to adopt the agenda? Second? And all in favor? All right, so moved. And there are previous minutes sent out. Did everybody take a look at those? If there are any comments, questions, or nobody has any
No
comments, questions, or changes? Then if we could get a motion to approve previous minutes?
To approve previous meeting minutes?
Second? All in favor? All right, so moved. Why do I have to ask for a second? We should just be like, making it happen. It's like somebody just seconded, okay. And I don't believe we have anyone here for public comment. Correct, okay. Just public heckling, I've heard, just heckling. Kim's just here to heckle. She's not here to comment. All right, well, basically then, we'll get right to our agenda item.
You've got the final plat first.
A final plat first?
Sage.
Oh,
Isn't that what we're calling it now?
I
Sage?
didn't. I thought we-
So yes, the first agenda item is the review and recommendation of the Sage at Marvin final plat. This was the former estates at Marvin Acres. It's the Brantley property. You guys reviewed and recommended the construction documents earlier this year, I think May or June. The developer has submitted their final plat and their bond estimate. Staff has reviewed. They're making some minor revisions on the plat itself, just some notes, but the actual plat and the lots are consistent with the previous adopted, or the previous approved sketch plan and preliminary plat. I can go into detail on this, but really just per our procedure, planning board is just, it's being brought to you guys. You guys make a recommendation of approval. And then the village council will then consider the final plat at their next meeting.
I've got a question, since I wasn't around then. Your write-up says that the 3 large lots are excluded. They are, I assume, between which zone and the creek, or what? Where are
Yeah, the original sketch plan did have 23 lots, 3 of those lots being 5 acres plus, and it was basically towards Marvin Branch, in the corner between Marvin Branch and Marvin Road, and then the top, and then the corner, basically on Marvin Road. So it was on the outer rim of the development. Those were then excluded, and just they did a minor subdivision for those, and they did this before their preliminary plat and construction documents, so it's, the lot design and everything did not change. Since those properties already abutted, public road and all that stuff, then they did meet the requirements for a minor just for those 3. And those were always intended to actually be 3 of the, I guess, investors or developers, like estate type lots. So this is, so the final plat just includes the 20 interior lots of the development.
Okay, and then, so they will access Marvin Road with individual drives or something, or?
The intent is still to actually access of the interior of this development. The reason, though, they were able to do the minor is that if the final plat for this development did not come to fruition, or they did not move forward with the development, those 3 lots they created were still compliant with our minimum lot regulations. They did have road frontage, so then they could still, in theory, have been developed for individual purposes if the overall development would have fell through. So the intent still to have them actually come off of the interior road of this development once it gets established.
Okay, like I said, I was not around at that time, so I was just, I read the comment and, where?
Yeah.
All right.
Well, I kept seeing for sale signs going up on the property, so I was very confused as to what was happening, so.
Some up and down.
Yeah, they're up and down, yeah, so.
Well, they're not supposed to be marking lots till the final plat gets approved. They can say coming soon and have like the sketch plan and stuff that has been approved, but actually the sell and like taking money and going under contract of lots, because the lots haven't been created yet. That's not, I mean, that's this final plat. The final plat creates those lots once it's approved and all signed off. I'm aware, I've already told the developer.
So the only question that I have then, so on this final plat, shouldn't it show an egress to those other 3 lots?
They abut that interior road, and that will be, even though it's a private road, those 3 exterior lots abut that in both the interior road and Marvin Road. So, so no, I mean, like I said, that the intent is that where they, no. Because since they abut it, that's, all property owners that abut that private road would have access.
Some access to it, okay.
Yeah, and they're probably gonna build out this way too. And they're treated as a separate, is it a minor are the 3 5-acre lots, are they considered a minor subdivision or just individual, lots? How are they even categorized?
What do you, I mean, if the 3 lots that were in the minor were created, they're just residentially zoned lots. They abut this development, but like I said, it's all going to be interior. It's just basically they took those 3 off of the final plat for financial purposes. Like I said, it's not, those can't be further developed. Like smaller lots, since they're 5 acres and stuff and met our minimum lot requirements, like that was why it was considered a minor for just those 3.
And let's see, in our current ordinance, or is it because it's a private road that, that's a long cul-de-sac really is what it is. And reading the stuff, in the new MDO, I guess would it not be allowed, sometime in the future, or since it's private, it doesn't matter?
Because the current ordinance is what is the governing ordinance, this, everything in the UDO is just, has not been adopted yet. Our current ordinance, per a text amendment we did last year, does allow for a subdivision to propose a single private road ingress egress. That has to be kind of approved with the approval of the sketch plan. The other standards of that, they still have to be built to public standards, they still, all that stuff, it's just that basically they're not dedicating it publicly. The intent behind that was that, you know, the conversations between the gated subdivisions and so on. So our current ordinance does allow for private roads. When the new ordinance gets adopted, if the road's established, the plat's recorded, they can still remain private.
Okay, I think I said that,
Yeah.
that's what, I'm catching up.
No worries.
I got a question. Do they have approval for access to sewer yet, or do you know anything about that? From the easement of the Estates of Marvin,
Yeah, that's already been all worked out. That was in their preliminary plat and construction documents.
change of the subdivision name too.
That wouldn't be included on this, correct? That would be on construction documents.
Yeah, and that's already, that was all back earlier this year. Like I said, this is just the final plat. It's just a procedure thing for them to move forward and basically plat the development to start selling and developing the lots.
This was presented as a conservation,
Correct.
and the question, we still can't remember, we're not holding it in our heads very well. Can buffer zones be considered the open space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because they're at the interior of the lot, or the common open space there that runs along the creek is like 4.5 acres, and then the buffer, the exterior buffer zones can still be, is still considered common open space for their percentage.
That's 2.5. So what fronts Joe Kerr's 2.5, and what's along the stream is 4.7.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anybody have any questions? Well, if anyone would like to make a motion to approve, or to send it on.
Motion to recommend, yeah.
There's a motion in your system that you do need to read.
Yeah, I'm looking for that right now, which is on,
It should be in the,
this first one, or the second one?
I can also read it
review and
aloud if you would
I'd go to maybe review and discussion.
That's why I get paid to make money.
Try the next one.
Oh, wait, no, it was right there.
I think they have something else at the bottom. It says I blank.
Well, there's,
No,
I think we've got it, the draft
This is
motion.
Draft motion to recommend approval of the final plat for the Sage at Marvin to the Village Council. Contingent upon the developer providing the village with the outside agency approvals, village engineering approval on bond estimate, and village attorney review and approval of the performance guarantee bond, security agreement, and maintenance agreement.
We'll need a second.
May I get a second? Second. And all in favor? All right, so moved. What is the bond estimate?
Oh, there's a whole sheet of those.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah,
Okay.
a lot of monies.
All right, so now we're moving on to the MDO.
Yep. So before I turn it over to Rick, I do want to mention, we do have some council members that are participating, or not participating, but viewing online, because they're trying to now get up to speed with the whole UDO when it, so they're, know everything that's going on being proposed when it comes to them later this spring. I will just ask to make sure anytime you guys are talking, just to make sure your mics are on and talk clearly into the mic. But other than that, I'm going to turn it over to Rick to go over articles from last month, which was Articles 13, 16, and 21, and the introduction of Articles 9, 10, and 11 tonight.
Thank you, Hunter. Madam Chair, members of the board, distinguished council members, and staff. I'm glad to be here in November. Before I get too far into this, I want to present to you the first batch of holiday cookies, I hope.
Oh, thank you very much.
They are for sharing.
No one has any allergies, any,
No, they're not from Hawaii.
You
No,
keep telling us
from
about
your, from your wife, your wife.
Oh, from my wife? No, no. I
'Cause you
thought
were
she said from
bragging about her
Hawaii.
cookies, so, you know.
Yeah, she has taken a hiatus this year. For some reason or other, she hasn't made cookies since
On
the
our
summer.
year, she took a hiatus?
Yeah, she heard.
Can we get a rain check?
I'll have to work that out with her.
Well, thank you.
She's in charge of her own cookie schedule. No, I think she's sort of backed off of that just a little bit lately. It surprised me. Well, anyway, I want to sort of walk you through fairly quickly the replacement pages that you have there for 2, 3, 7, and 15. And I kept my old versions just in case I need to refer back to any of the language. And in item 2, in Article 2, it's at the back of the first page. Let's see here. And you'll see highlighted in blue the additional language. The green, remember, is just reminders for me to circle back on those things. There are issues that need to be resolved in the future. So that blue is the additional language, and it helps clarify some of the issues on that conversation you just had about private roads. Okay? So, Article 3, there's an addition of schools. Rather than using customary, we've inserted some, 3 actually, definitions to address the school issue, and they appear on page 32 and 33 of the replacement pages that go in Article 3. You'll notice that we replaced the remainder of Article 3, and that's because this was enough to push all the pages to some degree. So you've got everything new from page 31 on, but the only language that's new is on 32 and 33. Private, charter, parochial, and then a public school definition and a technical or trade school definition. The item in Article 7 is on page 26 and 27, or the replacement pages, 25 and 26. And that was to add the Heritage District on page 25 to a list of districts that are requiring development agreements, which causes me to want to pause for a moment and ask the question of Hunter. Hunter, did this major subdivision final plat that was just the topic of the earlier agenda item have an associated development agreement?
No, not per our current ordinance.
I didn't anticipate that, but I wanted to confirm that before I say this so that you will know going forward the way that the draft ordinance is set up, you will not need to worry about the final plat. Because the final plat is actually, can't even be submitted until they've actually gone and set all those pins and all that work is done. The surveyor cannot even draw it, much less present it until all that work is done. So you almost never see rejection of a final plat, unless the issue has to do with performance guarantees, which is that bonding that you were discussing for incomplete infrastructure, because they want to start selling lots before the infrastructure is complete, right? Well, the development agreement handles that, and that does come to you, and that also goes to council, okay? So the development agreement is where all of these nuances, I saw this, I'm concerned about that, that's where you really get that sorted out. So when that final plat lands, it's signed by a surveyor, signed by the owners, signed by the developers. It's just a matter of signing off on that so it can be recorded, because it's not anything that you're going to really back up on, right? So why bring it through the planning board? Why bring it through the village council, okay?
It just becomes an administrative.
It's purely administrative. And there's a perception quite often that because it's on an agenda, that there's some subjectivity there. And that is the danger and the potential exposure that towns run up against. If you had, for example, not approved it or the village council didn't approve it, chances are it would be something that's really already either been addressed or that's not really related to the plat, and you can't actually hold that plat up. If they meet the requirements of the ordinance, they are entitled to that approval. And I witnessed one of these last night, as I explained to your staff, where I saw a huge liability issue. It was not in one of my clients, but it was one I went to because I wanted to see how it got handled. I do that for fun, that's free entertainment, Board of Adjustment hearings. So for all practical purposes, I just wanted to slow down for just a moment on that plat topic, because this particular change in Article 7 was to add another item that would require the development agreements in addition to plats, in addition to other things. Any development in certain areas, any development of certain classifications would require development agreements, because the nature of those developments is that they're more complicated. And that is the best place to work out those complexities. And the developers actually understand agreements far more than they really like to try to deal with things through zoning or votes or approvals and what have you anyway. So keep the plat, and work all the details out in the who's going to do what and when. Put that in the development agreement. So that way you've got something that's more enforceable. The last one, Article 15, and I'm going to be bringing up Article 15 probably going forward every chance I get, because that's the one that sometimes people will move quickly on. But the change is on page 4. We did pass out a new 3, 4, 5, and 6. There's also a change on 6 that has to do with the private property, no permit required recommendation by one of the board members. So that's where those changes are in those replacement pages. And you'll notice the watermark reflects tonight's meeting date when that material is distributed. So you've got all of the edits to date now in your possession. So were there any comments or questions on any of that?
Rick, I just want to mention for council and anybody watching along that the replacement pages will be, outside of Bob's, who's here tonight, will be updated in their binders and stuff once they either bring it back by or they come by and get it. But tonight they have all their new articles or the ones being introduced and being reviewed. But those replacement pages were not in the binders that they have received.
That's right. And if you see anything green, it means it's totally unresolved issue. Anything in yellow is stuff we want to point out and make sure we zero in on. And anything in blue would be new language that supplants or replaces previous draft language. Now, the next part of the agenda process on this is to review the articles that were introduced at the previous meeting. And I'm saying that, I know all of you know that, but that's for the benefit of the council members who are attending as well. So what we do now is we sort of play the hopscotch game, and we'll go back to the 3 articles that were introduced a month ago and see if there are any topics, questions, discussions about the materials that were distributed. And Article 13 is entitled Streets, and that's what it addresses, the streets and its related infrastructure, and how those streets are designed and where design standards fit into the picture, all of that sort of thing. Were there any comments or questions or discussions on 13? Okay. The sister article, if you will, that goes with that is Article 16, which was also distributed. Article 16 is actually entitled Subdivisions, and it basically pairs with Article 13. 13 is more the design. 16 is really 2 things. One are the actual regulations, like, for example, the question that came up tonight about posting signs in front of lots where final plats have not been recorded yet. That's all addressed in here. And also some of the general standards or regulations about design of subdivisions that deals with lots. Okay, and then it references streets, and then you get into the street portfolio there. So any thoughts on 16?
I have a question.
Okay.
And this is just because of my poor memory. So on page 2, the planned communities, and you described planned communities the last time we were here about.
Yeah, I can describe that in 2 words.
It's the Florida planned community, right?
It's Sun City.
So my question is it in here because it has to be in here?
Yes. It's a provision that exists. If you don't address it and you get caught off guard, then you don't have your provisions in place.
But,
Okay.
Part of the chapter 47F of North Carolina General Statutes.
Correct. A planned community is not the same as a planned community. This is a capital PC, not just a subdivision that somebody planned. That's a planned community to most people. A planned community with a capital P and a capital C under the Act the best example is Sun City. It's one piece of property. And all those individual homes are largely detached condominiums for all practical purposes. If I can sort of simplify my description. There might be some attorneys in the room that say, wait a minute, it's not that simple, but that's to give you an impression of what it really is, where you buy your unit, but you don't have any yard, you don't own your own driveway, none of that. None of that. So it's not a subdivision, and that's why it's important to call that out separately, because if that happens, because it is detached housing. Okay?
but we do not allow multiple dwellings on one piece of property.
Correct.
So,
Unless they go through that, and that can happen. You generally don't see that, but it can happen. And so if we leave it out, we're unprepared.
Mm-hmm.
Some people might say, well, we don't want to give anybody an idea. Well, good luck with that one, because if they've got the idea and you're not prepared, then you're not prepared. So we've got some provisions in there for that. But we do limit principal structure, the number of principal structures on property, and that's how you keep this under pretty good control. But if for any reason there was a process or procedure or an application that came through, you want to make sure that you've got clarity on that.
So the state statute, I guess, would allow, say, 15 units. You know, if someone, but we're saying it has to be at least 20.
No, the state statute would be the same thing
Oh,
right there.
it's
So
20
let's
as
say
well.
it's 100 units, okay? The statute would give you the parameters, just like the Planned Communities Act also deals, the Condominium Act also deals with condominiums, because you've got common and limited common components of those. A limited common might be a shared roof over one particular condo building. Common might be all the grounds or parking or circulation.
So, but these 1 through 4 are just restating the state statute?
Pretty much.
So it's nothing,
But it's written in your content, that's right.
Yeah.
But we've got it, we've got it touched
okay,
upon.
I mean, so it's not
Right.
a
That's right.
fine-tuning of the state, it's just, that's
And the reason that that's in there is because you have things that are, as you'll see, this is under the exempt land divisions. And it's separate than the traditional list, which is on page 1, because it appears in different chapters of the statutes. The stuff that appears in 1 generally appears in chapter 160D, as in David, okay? 802 actually. Then B appears in chapter 47F. So those are things that are not considered subdivision, the act of subdivision, be it minor, be it major, be it anything else. They're not exempt. They're not considered subdivision. They are not subdivisions. So we speak to this by saying they'll be reviewed against and held to the standards established for substantially similar developments. So if somebody brings in something with 100 homes on it, you're going to look at the design aspects as if it were that way. If, for example, that you were to revise the ordinance and take away the limit of one principal structure per property. Or let's suppose that there was a court ruling that took that away, because that happens. That's why I try to build these things as bulletproof as I can. Let's say there's a court challenge in another county, in another part of the state, that basically results in case law that says that it's unconstitutional to restrict a property to a certain number of principal structures as just a blanket policy. Let's suppose that got kicked out. Then where's your protection? You follow me? So that's, and because that's the kind of stuff that happens. It happens. I mean, we've got sign stuff that happens. We've got subdivision stuff that happens. And right now, we're getting a lot of tinkering in Raleigh. Since 2013 now, we've had, what's that, 6 long sessions in Raleigh, that there's been a lot of playing in this, in the law that deals with development, okay? And it has created gaps and holes and things of that nature, even with the rewriting of 160D about 4 years ago. So I don't know, without having a conference about planned communities, how to summarize it any more generally. Okay, all right.
Can I have another question on 11?
Article 11?
No, Article 16, page 11.
Page 11, okay.
And this is just kind of a general one. So the section on flag lots,
Yes.
does that only pertain to subdivisions with flag lots, or does that pertain to all flag lots?
Any flag lots. This is creating a flag lot. This gives you the provisions for creating a flag lot. The main issue with flag lots is quite often they will hide a house behind another house. That's kind of putting it simply. The intent of flag lots to be flag lot accommodating is to accommodate usually larger areas where someone wants to put a house and there's a great setting back by the pond or on the hill or something like that, and you want to take advantage of that setting in the topography, and it's a generally low-density situation. Not going into a subdivision that's got 112 lots and you're trying to squeeze in 113. By squeezing one in and sticking a house behind another one, I can show you pictures of bad outcomes. So this is written really around that first scenario, to be able to take advantage of the topography. But there are some basic standards, largely based on public safety issues like first responders and things of that nature. If you're out in a rural county, you may not have it quite so limiting, but usually when you're in town where densities are at least a little bit more, okay, there's more density than there is just in a rural area because you've got utilities and what have you. So you might have a density of 1 unit per acre or 2 units per acre in certain areas of town. Then you want to have some clear standards. And I can't tell you how many flag lots I've seen rejected because they didn't fit this standard. So I see this as being a tremendous limiting factor. If you want to loosen that, these numbers are the place we do that. We don't take out the provision. What we would do is change the numbers, and then we would talk a little bit about how those numbers relate to each other. For example, the length of the flagpole. We've got a maximum in there right now. We've got a minimum size for the resultant lot, meaning that it sort of keeps it about that rural setting back on the hill, back by the pond of 2.5 acres. Okay, so we've got a few factors in there that are intended to let folks use that tool, but use that tool for the most desirable of outcomes, not the less desirable of outcomes. Make sense?
Thank you.
No more than 4% of the total number of lots in a subdivision shall be flag lots. That's one that sometimes is helpful when someone comes forward with a flag lot, and it just comes together to where they could do a couple of them in a subdivision because the topography lays well or something like that. So do you want to have that sort of safety net so you don't end up with a lot of it? I heard a moment ago in the previous agenda item where there was some discussion about vehicular access. Those 3 lots that were really fronting on existing road networks, but were part of the original subdivision concept, the sketch plan or preliminary plat, but were pulled out and acted upon under the minor subdivision opportunity because of existing street frontage. But they're not going to utilize the street frontage for actual vehicular access. So it means that you're categorizing that frontage as legal access, but not necessarily their physical choice of access. Where is my driveway going to be? They want to push those back over into the subdivision, right? So there you're going to have some easements. You're going to have some accommodations over there for that, I'm assuming. in that process. So we try to anticipate as much as possible trap doors that create negative outcomes. And we try to also anticipate as much as possible opportunistic outcomes, because that's what we want to encourage, are the opportunities, and discourage the negative outcomes. But we don't always know exactly how every piece of property is going to work when you've got topography. If we were in Kansas, you could just stick to the grid and be all right. But here we have meandering creeks, and we have all kinds of other factors that come into play with street and road alignments and what have you.
All right, I'm sorry, I have one more.
Okay?
And this is just in general, so in 16, like around page 15, 16, when I was rereading it, there was this, and I'm not sure exactly where it is, but it's talking about how Marvin would approve utility water sewer systems to developments. And is that even really something Marvin can do? Because would that be Union County?
Well, what we're talking about is that the streets, let me describe it this way. A lot of towns will say, well, we don't do our utilities. We have an authority like SRU in Salisbury, or like Union County here in this area, like Charlotte Water in Charlotte, that is sort of disconnected from individual towns. And they say, well, why do we need this in here? Well, here's why. Because the predominant share of those utilities are going to be located in streets that are your streets, that are under your Powell bill system. So yes, we want to see the designs. Yes, we want to look at where they're located, how they're located, because once this is all said and done, we are going to be concerned with people out there digging up to make repairs, and what is the compaction, what is the proper repair or patching, that sort of thing, because they are in the town streets. Now, my goal with that is at the end of the day, when actually the village council accepts by resolution the dedication of a set of streets that have been the subject of a final plat and a subdivision, that's when you take them by resolution, into your Powell bill system, right? Ideally, you're not going to have to spend a dime on that street except maybe to get a stick out of a storm drain or a tennis shoe out of a storm drain for about 20 to 25 years. That's the goal. Not to be out there spending money, Powell bill money, on that street 3 years after it's constructed. And so the proof rolls and things of that nature that are done during the street construction, typically following the installation of the water and the sewer, as well as the storm drain pipes. But the water and sewer, which you do not operate, but they are an encroachment inside of your public right-of-way that you manage and maintain. You want to make sure that those proof rolls are done. You want to make sure that your folks are observing that, so the backfill and compaction on those pipes, if they cut, and here's, I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but different contractors will do their service connections differently. Depends on the contractor. And they have a choice. They can do it either of these two ways. One is that they install all the water main and or sewer main, okay? And they go ahead and they pressure test that for the stated amount of time, depending on whether it's water or sewer. It has to hold so that they can identify, do we have leaks or not have leaks? Okay, and then they get it passed so that it can then go into operation under Union County as the what's called ORC, or Operator of Responsible Charge, that's licensed by the state. So they got their line passed. Then they want to come back and dig down to the pipe every so many feet and make their taps. If we're not on top of this, we're going to have suddenly now what was approved, proof rolled, everything was nice and tight. Now suddenly we've got taps being made, and so you're digging half of the street up before the pavement goes down. The second group of contractors may say, no, we're going to take the gamble that we can put in all of our main lines and put in our service laterals over to the right-of-way line for water and sewer for each lot, and we're going to test them with the service connections in place, which quadruples the number of potential leaks, but that means that they're confident in their work. So we're going to have contractors that choose these among these different options, okay? One of which puts our road condition at much greater risk. The other one less risk, but we don't get that choice to say that we will not allow you to test that water line or sewer line until after your taps are in. They can do it either way. So it makes good sense to make sure that we are looking at where those utilities are, how they're put in, when the proof rolls are done, are the utilities in place? Are they going to have to come back and dig down for service connections? If so, are we going to require, yes, a re-rolling, re-proof rolling? Okay?
Okay, that makes sense.
Now you're all experts, right?
Please
In
no.
the construction of public infrastructure and neighborhood streets.
I don't think I needed all of that in my brain.
I thought it was good.
No, it's interesting, I just don't need it.
ORC, you called it?
Oh,
Yeah, that's what like Union County has to have an ORC, operator responsible charge. That is the person that's licensed by the state to operate their system. I grew up in the sewer, I like to say sometimes, because I started out as a surveyor on major infrastructure projects, and I always get pulled into utilities in a lot of towns that I serve. I get pulled into big utility decisions like interlocal agreements and how to make things work, you know, before the engineers get going, although I can't get away from being that engineer. Any other comments about 16?
Rick, I will mention, and I don't know, like, this is stuff that I could maybe just send to you, but like, on page 9, where it talks about frontage, as we were talking about private roads and stuff.
We're in 16, page 9?
Yep, Article 16, page 9.
Okay,
16.23C.
got it.
Says every lot shall front or abut on a public street with the exception that there can be up to 4 lots created off a private drive. And once again, this is for new subdivisions after this ordinance is adopted. But I guess where it says if the private drive meets or exceeds Village of Marvin's private drive standards, I think in our current ordinance, what we did for private roads, we just said our standards. So I guess my question is, do we need to have private drive standards, or can we just reference our public road standards for that?
I think that's definitely adequate, because you want your road standard, whether it's private or public, you want your roads built the same way, because
There's a
the
chance that-
oldest whining in the book, and you've heard me say, here's my little tiny violin, is after the gated community's been there about 40 years, they're gonna come to the village council and they're gonna say, our road's falling apart, and we pay more taxes in this town than anybody else, and we demand that you take our roads over and fix them for us, because we found out it was gonna cost us $1 million. So, yeah, so oldest trick in the book is for the developer to build the road substandard and then call it a private development, private street, gated, you know. So build them the same way.
And that is what our current ordinance reads when we did that.
This will
text amendment.
continue that,
Yep.
yeah. So I will take out the term private drive standards, and it'll just read Village of Marvin standards as set forth in the manual.
That's fine.
Okay, let me get me a little flag here. So I don't misplace this edit. Okay, thank you, Hunter. Any other comments on 16? Okay, well, that is, that's the hard part. The third component of remember, this is the BLT, the bacon, lettuce, and tomato, the subdivision process. And the third piece of that BLT is Article 21, it's open space. And this, as a recap, the open space covers types of open space with the intent to try to create ample open space without it being excessive open space. Ample meaning open space that's in the right place, that's accessible, that's usable, that actually contributes to the neighborhood. And that's where those A through E open space types are covered in Article 21. The last one, F, is really that sort of natural floodplain area, whatever the case might be, which it also exacts that in addition to the open space percentage. So some subdivisions are going to have far more open space than others because they have more environmentally sensitive areas. And and I'm saying some of these things for our new viewers tonight, so that if I repeat myself, but you all remember, we strive for the 5 wins: the citizen, the local business community, natural resources, that's the environment, leadership, That's staff, that's appointed boards, but it's the elected officials, it's the village council. And last but not least, those looking to invest in our community. And if you've got losers and winners, it's not a good plan. You want to create a successful venture for everybody here, okay? And that's the way we try to balance this. And, yes, sir.
Page 2, 21.2-2, the last paragraph.
Improvement?
Land designation as future open space. Am I right?
Okay, at the top, yeah.
Yeah. The last it says,
Last paragraph under there.
as compensation for any open space dedication, above the minimum requirement, you can get a bonus. In other words, he's got half the property that's wetlands and he can't develop it. So he can cram more houses in the remainder. Am I reading it wrong?
No, sir, this is as compensation for open space dedication associated with implementing any officially adopted plan above that requirement listed in table 21.1. Okay, so let's say that there is a, let's say there's some type of a plan that requires them to do more than what that table says.
Does that mean the lots?
Here's an example. Let's suppose that you've got a master plan for parks here that you've adopted as the town plan, and somebody comes along and they want to develop in that area, and that master plan calls for a park in that area. That as compensation for them setting aside more, they would get to protect the density that they would lose off of that parcel. Does that make sense? Let's say that you wanted to have, in addition to the normal requirement because of an adopted comprehensive plan or Parks and Recreation plan or Greenway plan. Let's say it was a Greenway plan, and you wanted this Greenway to connect from a development over here to a development over there, and it was going to require them to dedicate more than what their normal requirement would be in order to satisfy that, then as compensation for that, you will pay them back, and maybe they get to add 1 or 2 units to the net developable area.
Hunter, is that basically what the SAGE is as far as their wetlands area, the floodplain area, and the more high dense lots, basically?
Okay, so yes, our current ordinance has what is considered a conservation subdivision, meaning our minimum lot size in our current ordinance is 1 acre. Conservation subdivision allows for lots to be less than 1 acre, but the way it's worded is weird, so just hang with me here. But the minimum lot size then becomes 30,000, which is 3/4 of an acre. But then 30% of those lots can be less than 30,000, but not less than 25,000. Yeah, so it's weird. But the overall density does, for what the actual development could have been at one acre, it stays the same, roughly. And that's basically what he is saying, is that if they exceed the required open space, you're not increasing the density on it to be, if it's in, how you guys understand, 50 acres, 50 homes, it wouldn't be like 75 homes. It would maybe be, it's still going to be what the density allowable of 50 homes would be on maybe smaller lots, but then they still have to meet our minimum lot dimensions.
But it's only when it's triggered by an adopted plan, a plan
Correct.
adopted by the town. Like that Greenway plan, it says, well, we want to try to get this connection made between these 2 subdivisions with the Greenway, or we want to get this provision out here for this open space at this corner. So if it's not that somebody can just come in and say, I want to do a conservation easement so I can get more, a conservation subdivision so I can just get more density, and reduce my cost of infrastructure, concentrate the houses into a higher density cluster. Conservation subdivisions are really a form of cluster development. And that's not what this is. This is not not opening that door. This is only things that are resulting from a plan that you have adopted at the council level that says we want to have a connection through here. And it says as compensation for that, we will pay you in added. If you lose 2 units by dedicating that connection, we'll let you have those 2 units and factor them in, so it won't drop you automatically from an acre to 30,000. It just might reduce it a few square feet per lot, say 200 square feet per lot or 300 square feet per lot to pick up those 2 houses that they would have otherwise lost. So the town gets its connection. It pays them back in slightly smaller lots.
Would it also apply, although we don't have a plan for this, for instance, still using the Sage, they've set aside some land for a potential future roundabout. That's not necessarily, I mean, it's open space, but it's also NCDOT, so.
That's in here as well, and I'll show you where that is. That is called out, it's back under, I believe it's under 16, and it's called density bonus. And that is actually a provision of state law. That is a state requirement. Let me see if I can get my finger on it pretty quick here without getting lost in it. Thought it was up in 16.1. Maybe it's in 16.2.
16.2.3, or A3, the public acquisition by purchase of strips of land for widening or opening of streets or for public
No,
transportation.
those are exemptions. I'm looking for something else here. Let me just try to get my hands on it very quickly. I haven't had that one even come up for discussion in a while, but I want to make sure that, because you've brought that up, that I point that out. No, it's a density bonus provision. Just bear with me for a second here. It's kind of buried away back in the stuff just a little bit. That's why I'm looking back in the rear of this. Major subdivisions. I'm supposed to, but I forget some parts about exactly where I stuck something, because I'll stick it in there and then there it is until I need it, but I take the time to find it. I thought I had it in 16.1. So let me just find that for you. Wow, I've got everything else in there, don't I? It's in here. I'm not getting to it quickly. I was thinking I had a little heading on it. Let me look at streets just in case I've got it in streets, because it's related to that as well. But I don't think so. It should be in 16. It's in there. I just got to put my finger on it. Oh, there's one more place it might be. It might be under the major subdivision procedure stuff. I think that's where it is, up in Article 7, because it is a statutory requirement.
Hunter, while he's looking for that, back on Article 16, page 10, the buildable area section. In layman's terms, is that basically saying that you cannot include unbuildable area in your minimum lot size? Like you can't include
Thank you, Councilman.
Sorry, Kelly, ask your question again. I'm looking at, you said buildable area where it says lots or parcels shall not be unreasonably shaped and shall be made to contribute to the buildable area of a lot. Portions of a lot less than 15 feet wide shall be excluded from the minimum lot area. It's basically like if it's a non-contemporary looking lot and they're maybe squeezing in strips of land to get the minimum acreage.
Okay, yeah. So where is, I remember that now. Where is the section, did we not discuss at some point being, developers being able to, like, for instance, if a portion, like, let's say 20% of their land was not buildable, like it's a wetland or whatever. Is that, could they then carry that into a conservation?
They can dedicate those wetland areas to a conservation organization, to the town, or to an HOA.
Right, but we actually had someone coming in, then there were like some non-buildable areas on there, and they were trying to like squeeze more lots.
We don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, our current ordinance doesn't say anything that they can't do that, but this ordinance does.
Okay,
It has a certain percentage, if it's non-usable and already protected by, I mean, then only a certain percentage of it can be counted towards its open space requirement and certain things like that.
what section is that in?
That's in open space, chapter 21. No, yes. Was it 21? Yeah, look at page 6 and 7. That's where it has lands acceptable for open space designation.
Well, I apologize for not being able to put my finger on that DOT thing, but what happens is that is called a density credit. And I've got it, I'm going too quickly to put my finger on it, and I apologize, because usually I do pretty good with finding where my stuff is, but that one is something that almost never comes up. But what it boils down to is if there is a DOT action, that they can transfer that density that's affected by the DOT to this portion of the property or even another property, believe it or not. And that's kind of interesting, because in North Carolina, transfer of development rights, which is a topic in general, that is generally not eligible in North Carolina. In many states, you can transfer development rights as a way to conserve certain lands and protect certain lands. You can transfer development rights from one to another, provided that the zoning and things of that nature are there. But in North Carolina, you can only do it if DOT's impacting your property.
So, Hunter?
Anyway, it's in here. I'll find it before you next
it's okay.
month.
I just wanted to make sure it was in there. So on Article 21, page 7, I see what you're saying about, land acceptable for open space designation. So that's like land that's not buildable that can go towards your open space percentages. What I'm talking about, and maybe it's the same thing and I'm just being dense, but, sorry. If you've got 25 acres, you can put 25 homes, right?
Theory, yeah.
But if only, let's say only 20 acres are even buildable, or even 10 acres are even buildable, then a developer wants to come in and say, okay, well, I can put 20 homes on this piece of property because it's 25 acres. They're going to try and shove, 20 homes on a 10-acre spot.
You still have minimum lot sizes that play into that.
It doesn't override the minimum lot size.
Correct. Like, our current ordinance does allow, and once again, if it's constant, but like, they still have to meet the minimum lot size. when they, like, if you're using the Sage, yes, those 2 lots that abut that buffer, trust me, I wouldn't have put them there. But at the end of the day, that, if they can get out of the buffer and build the house, then the rest of the lot is still, it's not necessarily usable for buildable, but it's still part of a lot that can be, I mean, they can't put a pool, but it's still part of a lot. But no, like, what, the new ordinance is not saying, like, yeah, like, if you have unusable land, quote unquote unusable, if they can shift it and still meet the minimum lot requirements, then they can do that, but it's not saying that you then get a free pass to change it from 1 acre to a half an acre, unless that is the minimum lot size in the
Which is
district.
kind of what your conservation subdivision does right now. It gives them an automatic reduction in lot size. We don't do that here, and we actually restrict the lots from running into those environmentally sensitive areas. So if it's not a good idea to build there, don't build there. And what that'll translate to eventually over time is in the acquisition stage. In the acquisition stage, the developer will know what part of the property they really can't do anything with, so they may say, okay, I'll pay you your $100,000 an acre for these 20 acres, but I'll only give you $10,000 an acre for these floodplain acres because I can use those to offset and meet some of my open space requirements and things of that nature. And so that's where it'll do. And when it does that, the benefit, not to the environment necessarily, but to the leadership, particularly council, is they will stop trying to force development into that area, because if they look at a simple density rule, case in point, a town that had in their RL district 4 units per acre, you couldn't get 4 units an acre out of it. Their dimensions wouldn't work. But if people put land under contract, a developer put land under contract based on 4 units an acre, negotiated a price on the acquisition of it, then comes in to meet with Hunter and finds out it's not working, then they're going to be saying, what is it, Kumbaya here, you're killing me. And then they're going to go from Hunter to management, and then they're going to go from management to council, you're killing me, you're killing me. And so what's happening is they're losing their margin very quickly. Let's say they're running a 15%, just to make up a number, profit margin in their pro forma analysis, and they've lost 20% of the lot yield day one.
That's not the municipality's issue, though.
It's not, but the thing is we don't want them to misinterpret data they find in our ordinance. So if our ordinance says 4 units an acre, and then it has a lot of other trapdoors where they actually can't get that, then are we really helping them or not? So we want to make sure all of our numbers add up to where at the end of the day, they went into it expecting 85 lots or whatever, and they can get about 85 lots. Okay, that's key, and that's where I'll be coming to you in a meeting coming up fairly soon when we get to Article 8, where we will be looking at the comparisons between your current ordinance and the actual yield. We call it testing, where we actually test your ordinance, stress test your current ordinance to show you where it's working or not working, and the recommended districts that we would say you should replace those with, so that you are able to achieve the expectations that you may have when you go into the project. So we're not hiding any trap doors. We're putting it right out there up front.
I'm wondering if the 16-1-2A3 is referring to what you were talking about as far as the roundabout addition.
Oh, no, he was saying it's a state or federal.
Well, this
State or
says
federal.
the public acquisition of.
Yeah, that just says that if the town goes out and buys some extra right-of-way, it's not a, quote, subdivision, an active subdivision.
it's not part of-
These are statutory here
Okay.
at the state level. No, there's another piece that deals with transfer of development rights, and I'll find it. I've got my note on it, so we don't get bogged down. I apologize, because I must have it within a paragraph rather than with its own little heading. And I just need to put my finger on it so that I can share that with you next time, because that was a very good question, and I want to make sure that I'm able to share that with you. And I'm quite embarrassed that I can't put my finger on it,
Well, you should be.
because I usually do a little better than this. No, you know what it is? It's this holiday season.
Do you
It's-
need a cookie? Do you need some sugar?
It's cranberry sauce and things like that are coming at me. And, because this is my actual last act of professional activity for a little while. When I leave here tonight, I'm out for a little while, holiday time, you know? No,
So
not for the year, just for a little while.
is there any more questions on the articles that, from last month?
Right, on 21 in particular? Okay. Thank you, Hunter. So, now we're sort of circling in on the character articles. For those council members and what have you that have recently picked up their notebooks, I'm assuming that there is a reading guide in there, Hunter, is that right? And,
Yes, the council members and mayor that have their binders with them physically should have the reading guide. I know that one of the council members does not have their binder, but he does have the articles that's being introduced tonight.
that's right. So that reading guide takes you into the character part. So the book will not read with once upon a time and end with happily thereafter. It's built in silos for a reason, and it works extremely well when applied. So the new articles that I want to introduce tonight are going to circle you in almost to Dorothy's first yellow brick, okay, on the yellow brick road. We're sort of spiraling towards the center here. And it's Articles 11, 9, and 10, and they're not, yes, I could easily put them in there as 9, 10, and 11, but we're sort of backing into the punchline. So Article 11 is a interesting piece that I should have introduced earlier, but there was some confusion about it and everything, and so I didn't. And so this is a little bit out of order with the reading guide. But what I've done with Article 11 is I have produced my recommended form of Article 11, and the blue that you'll see in the early part of Article 11 on the first couple of pages is taken from your current ordinance. Those are purpose statements that I felt like you would probably want to retain. Those are word for word in JKL and N, M and N, from your current ordinance on purpose statements. But the rest of it is new language, okay? And that is a very detailed landscape and tree protection policy. And with tree conservation credits, all that stuff built in, disturbance issues, and remember, rare and specimen trees, all these different components. Public trees, that is trees that might be in public street right-of-ways or anything like that. I'm distributing this in its most complete form. You may see something that you feel you don't want to address or have. We can easily remove things. But I always show you the ragu. It's in there, spaghetti sauce, right? It's in there. It's all in there. If you want to take something out, we can talk about that. I'll point out the pros and cons of removing it, and at the end of the day, it will be the town's or village's decision to do that. This has some pretty stringent tree protection provisions in it. You may say, oh, that's too stringent, but it is in there so you'll see what it looks like. It gets into plantings and everything else. So take a look at it and read through it and see what you think about it. I've had one town that moved the threshold from 4-inch tree protection at 4 inches above at breast height, which is about 5 feet, 4.5 to 5 feet above grade. They moved it to 6 inches before they worried about protecting it. So there's all kinds of different thoughts and philosophies on this. I've had towns that said, let's take it out, and then within months they were like, we got to get it back in there because they're clear cutting such and such as property. So it's intended to make sure that we don't have that old adage, and remember, I'm a reenactment actor on the side, and as the developer once said, Ms. Smith, Mr. Smith, y'all have been great to work with, and we really enjoyed working with you on acquiring your property, and we're going to name the neighborhood Smith Estates, and oh, by the way, y'all have been so good to work with, we're going to, if y'all want to, y'all can go ahead and sell those trees off and keep the money. And Ms. Smith and Mr. Smith say, you know, that developer, he was so good to us. Next thing you know, you've got a clear-cut piece of property. And that's what that whole strategy was about. So we've got clawback provisions, things of that nature in there. So the clawback means if it happens, if a plat or plan comes in for development within so many years of that type of activity, then it doubles the planting ratios on all the new plantings of trees and things of that nature, plus the fines. And you may say, well, we don't want to do fines, we'll only do the trees, or vice versa, or whatever, but I just wanted you to kind of know a little bit about what that's all about in there. Depends on how bad you want to punish them. Some towns want to string them up by their ankles, you know, and beat them with a sock filled with tennis balls or something. And some towns want to let them off the hook. It just depends on your appetite for it. If they are under if it is a bona fide tree farm and they are under what's called a forest management plan approved by the state, things of that nature, then they're exempt from that. They can timber that property, they can tree farm that property and that sort of thing. So it takes into account all these interrelationships with other standards and other regulations and what have you. So, that's 11. And like I say, that should have come at you because that was back in the earlier part, the PB&J phase of the project, the peanut butter and jelly combination for commercial development predominantly.
And I do want to mention, I'm going to send this, we contract with Union County, the urban forester. He is a huge asset for us in reviewing plans and going to for guidance. I'm going to send him this copy just to get some initial comments. My one question, which we don't have to really get into, but 11.2 under administration, I know it, once again, it says that the subdivision administrator and talks about public works administrator. Should we add the terms or his designee or add anything for the Union County urban forester as a applicable person to enforce this ordinance?
I actually disagree with that. What I would recommend is that you keep it like this for a reason. Mm-hmm. Because if you go to the article that establishes your role, Hunter, you are that person that fulfills that role, then you can delegate certain tasks to individuals. So if you end up no longer contracting for that and having that coming in here, then you've got an ordinance or text amendment to deal with. Yep. So right now, you can designate an assistant planning administrator or an assistant to do this task or landscape or whatever the case might be. So I would recommend that you keep it that way, and any contract or interlocal agreement you have between the municipality and the county be worded as such that they would be acting in support of your role, because ultimately you are the one that makes the determinations. You may base it on a particular expertise that a particular team or staff member holds. Okay? We don't want to stimulate text amendments just because of a relationship doesn't stay the same over time.
I'm seeing a landscape requirements with buffers, and then there's a table, but it's for non-residential development. For buffer yard chart for non-residential, is there not a buffer chart for residential, or are the type B, C, D considered?
Most of the, well, the way this table is written right now is this is for your separating uses, not separating neighbors. Now, if you want to separate all subdivisions, that is not something that would be in that table, because this is where a use in a particular district abuts of incompatible use in another district. That's what that buffering is about. If you're talking about separating neighbors with just perimeter buffers, that's something we would do over in the, we would state that in the subdivision requirements and then refer them to a standard for what that buffer is in here. If you're, because some towns.
So my question is actually a little bit more personal than that, because there are a lot of homes that are not necessarily in subdivisions, or rural properties that abut each other, and then there are changes then to the rural property next door, right? So, we're dealing.
The development
Where is
district is
that?
the one that has to provide, is the one that triggers the buffer, is the way this is written. The district in which the development is occurring triggers and provides the buffer. So if there's an existing stable situation and there's new development, then that new development provides that buffer, which is pretty typical. Now, there are also interconnectivity policies in here to where you want to set your subdivisions up to where you don't have to drive around to go to the house behind you, leave the subdivision, go down the road, come back in the subdivision because the kids that live behind you play together or something like that. You normally want to see your subdivisions mesh into some kind of a pattern and interconnect. Now, you don't have a lot of new subdivision potential here.
And I'm not talking about new subdivisions, I'm talking about homes and subdivisions that have been here for 40 years. So where is the section on from neighbor to neighbor, not necessarily subdivision to subdivision? We don't
There's
have
not gonna be,
anything?
because the use is still residential between the two.
Okay, but you keep saying subdivision though, so that's what's throwing me off, is that there are people who aren't technically in subdivisions, so.
So
where
what
does
he's
that-
referencing is like if a new subdivision were to be proposed and it abuts an existing subdivision or existing residential lot, then the new subdivision would have to do the perimeter buffer and stuff. But uses in between individual residential zone lots, i.e. if there's a vacant lot or a wooded lot and they build a home on it, that's just residential between residential. It's not necessarily calling for additional buffering.
So, but is there not a section about buffering for just individual? Because I mean,
Let's say
we've
you're
got-
going to
we've got
build a store.
multiple- We've got a lot of lots recently that have been multiple acre lots that are now getting subdivided into small 1 acre or smaller 1 acre lots.
That's a subdivision.
Even if it's only like,
If it's a minor, then yes, but like our current ordinance, there's nothing I can do for a minor subdivision, because it does not, where the subdivision language is and talks about perimeter buffering and stuff and tree save and all that stuff is all applicable to major subdivisions per our current ordinance.
This applies across the board.
so what about for the homes that are getting knocked down and a bigger home is now being put on the
If it's a
property?
pre-existing lot, the buffer,
Well, the tree save, under the new one, it would be more about a tree conservation area rather than you go in and cut out trees, because normally you build buffers where you're grading or clearing land. If you're just opening up to build a home on a wooded tract, you're not going to go back to the property line and grade that out. So you don't, because most of your buffers are
You
where
would think
people.
you wouldn't.
You would
But
think.
there are people that are doing it.
But, well, that's where the tree protection provisions come in. And the tree conservation areas, they have to identify before they get the permit to build that structure, where they're going to set up their tree conservation area. So they identify and then they protect or leave that area rather than clearing those areas.
You would think.
Well, this would be the law if it were adopted.
and even if they do it, then there's still fines and then mitigation that's extra that has to be then occurred. Because like people, I mean, I know what instance you're talking about, and I've conveyed, like, they did get a tree removal permit for X amount of trees, they removed Y amount. They will be mitigating / paying a fine, but I cannot force them to mitigate. Like, basically, the only thing I can do, because the zoning permit has been issued and the house is already under construction, is that I can hold the final zoning certificate per our current ordinance until those trees are mitigated.
So, and I know that my situation is like under our current ordinances, but like, so my question really is, where in this new one, is there any protection for people moving forward? Because I don't want someone else to have happen what's happened
Okay.
to us.
Let me go back to my introduction, Madam Chair, and let me say it this way. 11.1 through 11.7 deal largely with things like where a new development comes in near an existing residential area. Let's say it's, just for discussion's sake, a new school or a new business or something like that. then buffers and all of those triggers, but are parking lot improvements and tree plantings in parking lots, all that stuff is 1.1 through 1.7, okay? Excuse me, 11.1 through 11.7. 11.8 through the end of the article is the stuff you're talking about, where somebody comes in and they want to do something, and what are we protecting? Because the best buffers are usually what you've already got, rather than coming out and planting a bunch of, short to intermediate stuff and waiting on it to start doing its job. So the tree conservation area, which shows up on 13, will show you how, and all I can suggest is I'm introducing it. I don't want to try to pick out one issue and point you to it. I'd rather you review that, and I think that depending on your interest, and that's why I'm pointing out these sections, if you're more concerned with protecting something from others, look at 11.8 through the rest of that article. The first part is really about this new school going in next to this subdivision, and where's the buffer go, and what's the planting ratio in the buffer, and how wide's the buffer, and all that, because you're using most of the site. But if you're building a house on a lot, gonna clear some trees, 11.8 on the tree protection, okay? I think that will answer most of your questions, and then maybe at the next meeting, it'll be easier to focus in on specific examples rather than, because right now, based on the example you're using, all I can say is it's covered by that second whole half of the article, pages 12 through the end.
No, that's good. I appreciate it. It's just, when you're, like, Article 11 just says landscape requirements and tree protection. So,
That's right.
it's a little confusing if we're talking about, like, when does it apply to subdivisions and new subdivisions? When does it apply to individual lots?
Take a look.
Residential.
Take a look in there. That's just the title. Okay.
But the biggest,
Preservation of a single pine tree is not typically encouraged.
I will mention, like, this is so much better than what's in our current in multiple ways, because our current ordinance has a landscape buffer section, and Rick's looked at it and he wanted to throw it out, and I said, go for it, because it's 47 pages of confusing crap that then references other sections of the ordinance, and it references chapter 93, which is the tree section, and the intent of why we're doing this is to get it all in together, because the problem right now we have is that in our current landscape and buffer section contradicts what it says in the subdivision section, that contradicts what it says in chapter 93. So that's why it's all kind of, in tree protection, all that kind of goes into this whole article here.
And that's the gist, is start with protecting the trees that you have rather than just focusing on everything being planted from scratch as the only way. When I first moved to North Carolina, I jokingly called the Bradford pear the official tree of the Charlotte region. Of course, that's all changed, but that's what it looked like in the 80s. Every parking lot bloomed for 2 days, and then that was it. The next two articles are getting us really actually close to the center. Article 9 is about standards and specifications based on building type. So this is getting into form-based code, okay? And it breaks out each of the buildings by building type. Detached homes, attached like townhomes, any kind of multifamily, which includes condominium. It might include a resorty component or whatever. It gets into your civic stuff, schools, religious institutions, et cetera, et cetera. It gets into your like downtown type of settings, your work, your shop front, like in your heritage district, if you were to have any of that kind of componentry. And so take a look at that. It's by building type, okay? And this will all make sense when we get to the punchline in Article 8 at a future meeting. And then we're going to be drilling into the weeds on everything. So Article 9 is really about that. Now, there's some stuff that's repeated in some of the non-residential, some of the commercial type stuff for a reason. And it's the anti-monotony provisions. Anti-monotony, so you don't have if you ever were to get a box, and that can apply even to, institutional type buildings. Okay, so your anti-monotony is very important. Anytime something has a large building mass, you don't want these plain, straight walls, okay? Not if you're trying to create a place. Now, if you had industrial parks and all that, that's a different story. But we're talking about Marvin, and we're talking about a largely residential-oriented community. But we want to make sure that anything that does happen in the future that might be non-residential in context is done right. You might say, well, we might not ever do that. Well, you might not know what a future council might do. If you've got it in the ordinance, at least you've got your safety net. It's not costing you extra to leave it in there. Okay? You follow me? Yes. Because I have seen.
That's why townhouses are in here.
Townhome, everything's in here. It's the ragu stuff, okay? If you take it out, you're uncovered in that should it come to fruition in some kind of Burkdale project or, Waverly project or whatever you might run into in the future. Article 10. So that was the bright side. Article 9 was the bright side. Remember, we're swirling. So as we get to the other side of the swirl, we go through the ugly side. Uses with additional standards and special uses. Uses with additional standards are that 10.1, and that goes up through about page, this is going to be boring reading here, but I just want you to know it's in there. And it's going to get a little easier once we get the Article 8 tables together for you and all of that, but it goes through page 31. Accessory dwellings. For example, we already know what the issues are that go with those. We don't have to make up new issues. You don't want to end up with some kind of procedure where they come in and you're sitting here on the fly making up conditions. We already know what most of them are, but there might be one that's hanging everybody up. So your conversation focuses on one and misses the ones that we already pretty much know about. So that's the way this is written. Certain uses in certain districts would already have certain extra standards. I'm just going to make up an example. Let's suppose that someday you had a convenience store that sold gas and had a car wash out back, and it was a QT or a Sheetz or whatever you want to call it. Well, we already know that those car washes out in the back of the parking area like that, sometimes you'll have headlights that might pan. So we have extra screening requirements in addition to the buffers. That's an example, just an example. And we've got them all in those first 31 pages. The second part of this article, 10.2, are special uses. That's the scary stuff. The scary stuff. The things that get people upset at the bare mention of their name. Cell tower, solar farm, whatever.
We dealt with one of those. That was not fun.
We already know what most of the issues are. So we list them out so that when they walk in the door with a petition or an application for that, they already know the evidence. And everything in 10.2, special uses, remember, evidentiary. So all these things that they have to demonstrate are evidence that's used in the process of obtaining a permit. And you can add some standards provided they agree to those standards. But you need to start with something written. So that's what that's about. And that's why I say this is the boring reading, because chances are most of the scary stuff, when we get down to the table and you're looking at the table, we've got measures. We've got certain measures to where it might add 3 very difficult steps. Maybe 2 of them are legislative, like a rezoning, and then to be eligible for that scary use, overlay zone that adds a second rezoning, and you can't apply for the second one until you've gotten the first one. So you got to get past the first hurdle, then you're eligible to go for the second hurdle, then you've got a special use permit, which puts you into quasi-judicial. So that's the way we deal with the scary stuff. We make it very You know, if I'm gonna do a hazardous industry, I'm gonna walk in the door and I'm gonna make it, it's gonna be crystal clear what's going on. It's not gonna be something like I witnessed yesterday that slid right through the cracks because of poorly written ordinance language. Okay? That was that free entertainment I told you I went to enjoy. Sure.
So under accessory dwelling units, so it starts at 10.1.3,
Right.
and then when you hit 10.1.4, which is, no, so then it's something different?
Yes. Each 10.1 dash whatever that number is, each additional number after that dash is a different use.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, thank
Now-
you, because I was like, it's hard to,
10.3, well, you won't ever read these as a whole, except what you're doing. When you get your table, what you're gonna see happens in the table is, let's suppose that accessory dwellings are listed as a use with additional standards in certain residential districts. When you see in the table accessory dwelling, and you go to that district, it's going to say A, for additional standards, and in parentheses, it's going to say 10.1-3. So you're never going to be in here reading all of this stuff. You're going to go to a table because you want to build an accessory dwelling. You're going to look it up. It's going to point you to 10.1-3. Or if it's I'm just going to flip a page and pick something, adult establishment. It's going to say 10.2-3. And you're going to go straight there and you're going to see all this stuff. That's how it'll be used.
yeah, that makes sense. I was just
Yeah.
like, we were in accessory dwellings, and I'm seeing bank savings and loans, and I was like, wait a second, what did I just miss? So,
Now, there's accessory dwellings, and then you'll move on to 10.1-4, you know, any kind of auto boat equipment repair services and what they have to do to make sure they don't have junk outside and whatever.
The example of this is like when we did the gated subdivision text amendment earlier this year, or whenever the heck we did it. We did gated subdivision as a permitted or special use. I can't remember how we did it, but then we said, we put it in the permitted uses under that district, and then we put C, section, blah, 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 for additional regulations. And then that's when in our current ordinance, we created that new section that said, requirements or regulations for additional uses, and that's where we put all of this in. It's doing the same thing, but we're gonna have a nice pretty chart instead of it kind of having to thumb through the ordinance and being all confused based off of our current one.
And there's going to be a lot of uses in there that you're not going to want, but if you don't identify them, remember we had this conversation earlier, if you don't identify them, then under case law, they get rounded off to the closest thing. So if you want to prevent it, identify it, so it's easy for Hunter to look in the table and go, oh, bed and breakfast, yeah, we don't want any of that bed and breakfast action here in town. It's not listed in this district, so you can't do it. It's not spoken to, we're quiet on it, and so no one knows, you know. And I'm picking on innocent uses because I'm just picking on things. I'm not against bed and breakfast. Okay, or Airbnb, and people will say, well, where's Airbnb in the table? Well, it's not going to be in the table because Airbnb can be several things. It can be a bed and breakfast that somebody books through an app online and does all that, or it can be my sister-in-law staying in our guest room. Is that really no different than that? You know, somebody just borrows a room for a couple nights and it doesn't happen often and it doesn't clog up the driveway, then that's really just a house with somebody staying there. If they want to rent the room out, no big deal.
oh, wait, Austin, do we have to get permission we have to vote to let her speak?
You don't have to vote, you all have to agree.
Okay. Can we please let Kim ask her question? Everybody good? Oh, okay. Overruled.
Thank you. So I'm going to use the example that our mayor always uses. How can we put in a use that we don't know that we have, like a vape store? So vape stores didn't exist 10 years ago. So if we didn't have it and we didn't have it in here, then how do we prevent vape stores? Or what we don't know that's coming down in 10 years?
That's a really good question. It has a two-part answer. This is predominantly the big use thing, not something that happens inside of a little store. This is mostly things that might have some outdoor or some other implication. So the table is very robust. When you see the table, you're going to flip through and you're going to go, oh my God, this is like hundreds of uses identified. So that's how you do it. You call it out. Now, the second thing you do is you list it only in districts that you probably don't have on the map. So you create districts, okay? Or either you reserve the use and make it clear that it's not allowed in any district. Now that's the first part of the answer. The second part of the answer, and speaking to your question about things that are coming down the road that we don't know, chasing trends. In the art of administration, and this is something we drill into the folks that adopt the ordinances, we work with them very closely for 2 years at no cost. We drill into them, and it's the art of administration, and that is looking beyond some catchy name. So I'm going to pick on catchy names for a moment. I picked on Airbnb, I'm going to pick on Uber, I'm going to pick on all of that. What is Uber?
Taxi.
It's a taxi cab. What's not to recognize about that? Okay? What is Airbnb? It's a booking mechanism for either a room in a house or something that's essentially a bed and breakfast or an inn. And the art of interpretation is when we look at it and we say, okay, they've got 3 rooms and they're booked half the time. That's pretty much a commercial activity, and they're booking through Airbnb. A good friend of mine, retired judge from Cherokee County, Georgia, runs an Airbnb campus in Saluda, North Carolina. You know, is it passive? Heck no. You know, you're parked out there in front of your cabin or cottage and there's other cars and people you don't know. That's a commercial activity. The art of administration will tell you how to analyze and how to evaluate that. But over at my house, if we had a big event and my wife said, man, you know, we could get $1,000 if we let these people rent our spare bedroom for a week during the new Charlotte Olympics in 2037.
Or any of the golf tournaments, or...
You follow me? So the art of interpretation is critical to this, and that's where that's going to require competent staff. In Article 23, it requires that staff be competent staff and meet some professional development standards, whether it's CZO or AICP, something in that arena. Because if you don't, and they're administering the ordinance, you're going to get chewed up and spit out if you ever get a big challenge. They're going to go after qualifications.
So,
There's all kind of stuff. It's all.
It's hoteling.
It's all this stuff. So what you have to look at are the fundamentals of land use. And here's the thing that you have to remember is the general statute under the hat over there authorizes you to exercise land use and land development controls. So you can't get all the way up in somebody's business just because you have that authority. You can't get in there and say, well, we're not going to let you do, you know, this or that because we don't like that brand, or we don't like that name, or we don't like you, or any of that stuff. So the subjectivity is off the table. And I hope the council members are listening loud and clear. 160D made very clear that errors made by staff, by appointed boards, or by the elected official board in carrying out an administrative determination. And when this board votes on a plat, when council votes on a plat, that is not legislative. That is an administrative determination, and it is overturned by the courts because it's deemed to have been subjective, not following the written law. You are responsible for all associated court costs for both sides. Automatic. No longer do they go forward and say, Your Honor, we spent 2 weeks, we lost a lot of money, we spent all this, we had all these experts, and the judge looks at you and says, everybody go home, pay your attorneys. No longer is that the case. Now it's all automatic. It's automatic. And typically it's expensive on the developer side because they're fighting for their project. So most of your court costs are going to, or associated costs are going to go from around 60 grand for a typical appeal to ask a Superior Court judge to review a case, no juries or anything like that, just bench trials, to, I don't know, 300K if it goes to Superior Court where you've got testimony and experts involved and things of that nature. So it's important for you to understand in the art of administration, let's let the person that's qualified to do it, and let's shift the real decision makers or the real decision making to the governing board, not under an administrative role, i.e. reviewing a plat. Terrible idea. If it meets the standard, it meets the standard, make your standard robust. But a legislative role, legislative means they're making law. What is a change on a zoning map?
Law.
It's a change of the law on one page of the new ordinance called the official zoning map. And they can subjectively look at it and say, you know what? I vote no. And stop talking. You don't have to justify no change. However, it's statutory that you do have to justify a change. That's what a statement of consistency is a justification for change in your written ordinance or the zoning map. A statement of reasonableness that only applies to zoning map changes is justification for that zoning map change. So the simplest way you can control things is on your zoning map. Have a robust ordinance to back it up and use your zoning map to just vote no. And always, always, always make the motion in the affirmative on the matter in front of you on zoning.
It's always good to have a lawyer on the board.
Always, because I have seen, I've seen people say, I make a motion, we turn down this rezoning. Well, what that means now is that yes means no and no means yes. So always make the motion to call the matter, which is that draft zoning map amendment or what you call rezoning. Doesn't mean because you're making a motion to call that you support it. It just means you want to get it up for a vote. Then a yes is an approval of it and a no is a rejection of it. And I've seen that happen, boom, boom, with some well-trained council members. I make a motion on the matter, second. All those in favor, crickets. All those opposed, no. Go down in flames 0-4 so fast, and the developers thought it was sailing their way. And so it just cleans it up. And then don't go into, I'm voting against this because. It's the worst thing you can do. So I'm not here to give you legal advice. I'm here to give you strategic advice on how to keep yourselves out of these appeals, okay, is to follow what these general statutes have laid out. Because remember I said when I first met you all that the new statutes, the 160D that were enacted and went into effect in 2021, were they didn't come right out and say don't do it this way. What they did was they hid that point and simply put it was the whole was greater than the sum of the parts. You had to read all these little parts to really figure out that, well, gosh, we really shouldn't be doing it this way. We really need to rely on the zoning map to manage the development. So the new zoning map should really reflect existing conditions and not put a bunch of speculative zoning on your map. Don't go ahead and zone something for a density you're not ready for. Zone it to protect it so that in any new project of any size or scale, there's a rezoning in the path. That gives you that legitimate legislative opportunity to say, no, I vote no.
So I do want to just, add and clarify. So like, I know with council kind of starting to, pay attention and participate, and even for planning board moving forward, coming up to on our next meeting, the permitted use chart and stuff in here is going to have a lot of things, yes, we do not want or ever think would ever happen in Marvin or ever see in Marvin, but it's in there for these protections where, one, some of these uses you can't legally say no. Like when I say legally, you can't legally prohibit them in the ordinance. But you can make it very hard or make it a legislative decision to where they're not granted it by right per se. And so that's the kind of the intent of doing this and stuff that Rick and I have talked about, is having these tools in the toolbox and having these zoning districts that have some of these uses in it. But at the end of the day, all the properties in Marvin are going to remain the current, or, you know, a zoning district similar of characteristic. You might have a quote unquote, I'm just going to use manufacturing or industrial district, but anything that's proposed in that has to be first approved at the rezoning level. But it also then helps to have that in there, and I'm just using this as conceptual, kind of an idea, like if the Birch manufacturing over here ever annexed in, well, now we have a district that we can zone them when we annex. Currently, we don't. So there's benefit to having these things in there, and it does allow, like I said, it's when you're reading it and put it into pieces, you're like, whoa, we don't want this, or this isn't, you know, the Marvin. But the goal is where you have it in there for protection, and then you still have a process to, yes, in theory, potentially allow it, but that process is a legislative decision, not something that's coming to me, like currently with if it's subdivisions and other stuff.
Yeah, if you have nothing to address it, if you have nothing in there,
So does that help you?
and you can't just come out and prohibit it, but if you have no path forward for it, then you can't isolate it. It's going to get rounded off. And as the questions came out a little while ago, very good questions about different uses, that's why we put in a robust table and a robust set of things, and then you use that zoning map to basically keep that door closed if those are things that you don't want in town. Because if you leave it out of the table, or then something's going to get rounded to the closest thing that is in the table.
So
You may not like that outcome.
yeah. So Kim, I know you're.
So then do I need to add like a tobacco section,
No.
a weed section?
No. So what we're saying is like,
It's in here.
yeah, it's not.
It's in the table of uses. That's just for additional standards.
We don't have the
We-
table.
The ta-
You
that's
don't
what I'm
have
saying,
that.
next
We're
meeting.
not done. We're still way down the road.
Okay, I'm just asking the question.
Yeah.
So, but
This is my first pass at this, so I didn't realize that the table wasn't in here.
Yeah,
So
Article
let's
8.
everybody relax.
Right. Article 8 will be introduced, and it will bring the table to it. It's sort of getting to the center of the spiral, and that's what we're working
We
around
don't have the
fringes.
meat on the plate yet, we just still have the potatoes and the green
so,
beans.
but Kim,
We're a long
to
way.
clarify, yes, when the permitted use chart, the zoning district and permitted use chart is to be proposed, I guess, at our next meeting. Is that the intent?
Yes.
So all of that then brings this all together. So in that's where we then kind of flush out some districts. Like I said, a part of the problem with our current ordinance is that previous staff, elected, whoever it was, thought if we didn't have districts in there, they will never be. And so they deleted zoning districts out of our ordinance, and then it still references. So with certain uses, like I said, we can prohibit them we'll have them in the table, and where we'll say, you know, a P for permitted under a certain district, and some, it might just be blank, meaning that it's basically not permitted in any district. Or you can permit it in a district, but that district still is not applying to our zoning map at the current time and has to go through a rezoning process, which then the legislative body is the one that can deny or approve that.
I think that knowing how we have certain citizens who read much of what we do, I think it will be important for us as a municipality to get ahead of this, to say, this is what this is. This does not mean that we allow it. It just, we need to explain that, or else there are going to be people who are losing their minds. So.
And trust me, and like that's stuff that we have thought through, and but once again, like the intent of this is where, yes, like if it's in here, it doesn't mean that it's ever going to happen and all this stuff. It's just that because of things that have happened in our previous ordinance, that's the issues of why it's being done this way. As Rick mentioned, there's been case law and other stuff of how, the way it used to be done, it basically said, here's your permitted uses. Anything else that's not listed here is pretty much expressly prohibited. And then you kind of got away, or the municipalities kind of got away with interpretation, like, oh, that's not listed, it's prohibited. Now it's changed. It's like if it's a vape store and you don't have vape store listed, then from an interpretation standpoint, I'd most classify that as a tobacco store. If you don't have.
What Kim mentioned and what John just mentioned to me is kind of like the cannabis situation that might come down the pike in North Carolina and be approved. I mean, that's not exactly tobacco, too, see?
Well, let me point something out because, Board Member, you bring up a
Yeah.
very good point, and this is, let's see here. You know, we had in our long session this year, we had a bill on medical marijuana that was getting around pretty good, and
Yeah, because one of our permitted uses is a specialty pharmacy.
right, and so on page 51 of
that-
Article 10,
That could be a specialty pharmacy. Oh my God.
take a look at page 51 in Article 10.
51 in Article 10. This is a long article.
10 is very back of Article 10, page 51, 10.2-17, because we don't know, remember, our charge is land use. The state may say, well, we're going to allow medical marijuana but not recreational marijuana, or whatever the case might be, but if we don't have the standards in our ordinance or the policies in our ordinance as to where and what, then it's going to pop up in that tobacco, it's going to pop up at the gas station where they're selling us a pack of cigarettes. Okay, so we've identified it, we've called it out, we've got separations from residential, we've got all the kind of stuff for you to look at in there on this. Now, just like with electronic gaming, what they call video games or video poker, the electronic gaming, we can't regulate whether it's legal to gamble or not gamble. That's a state matter. But we can regulate the place. So that place may or may not have legal gambling or illegal gambling, but if it's got any kind of electronic gaming, what are the standards? Okay, so we don't just suddenly have that going on at, somebody opens up a restaurant here and they've got a bar area, and the next thing you know, there's gaming machines in there. You follow me? If we don't speak to it, then it's a problem. And so we've got some foundational language. We don't know where the state's going to land, but to get a jump start. I did some of my continuing education recently on land use and marijuana in general, you know, as it's legalized in different states. And one of the things that's been quite problematic out there is inconsistencies. But one of the things that they also pointed out was that when you see a state pass medical marijuana, on average, it's been about 3 years. That's sticking your toe in this, when a state legislature sticks its toe in that water to see how hot that water is. And if that water's not too terribly hot, the tax revenue bug bites them. And the next thing you know, you're looking at recreational marijuana from a revenue stream. So from a local government standpoint, when North Carolina started talking medical marijuana, I immediately pulled together, this may not be the right solution, but it's my best guess at how to address what will likely be the major issues that people have with places that might dispense. Because I tell you something that's going on right now is the Delta seltzers and CBDs. I mean, that stuff is everywhere now.
That's just health, they're just, I mean, it's just health food
It's
now.
it's
just
coming,
vitamins
and we aren't really ready but at the land use level, we can't say, through our zoning ordinance, we can't say that you can or can't sell this product. What we can do is establish standards and districts upon which you can sell it.
Well, it
Okay,
looks
we
like
can't prohibit it.
It looks like, based on this, I mean, we have a very limited amount of commercial space where something could even go. And
Bingo.
this 1,000 feet in any direction,
I was about to hit on that, and that's, once again,
district, that
The-
eliminates the Heritage District as a potential
There you go.
location.
reason, yes, is basically that there's certain things, and you were hitting on with the electronic gaming stuff, and I had to do with this in my previous job, is like, you can't really, that's kind of what I was saying, you can't really outlaw because it's unclear. But
We don't
you
have the
can-
authority to outlaw it.
But you can regulate where by land use, and if it's, you know, what they then do is like, yeah, it can't be within 500 feet or 1,000 feet of any property zoned residential. Well, heck, that knocks out all of Marvin pretty much right there. But then,
But
you know,
Newtown Gardens, I mean,
but see, but that's its own zoning district. But if that was a commercial district, then these standards apply.
It doesn't-
Technically,
it doesn't-
residential is allowed in that district, and so that still would,
The,
prohibit.
uh,
Like, it would be-
Marvin Gardens has those homes
Yeah.
right behind it, so
So-
it would also be kicked out.
so that's the way that you do it, is once again, it's in here. Yes, that's what I was trying to explain, is there's opportunity, or there's maybe an avenue, but is there really, hard to tell, because until it really gets proposed and you start looking at it by that property, by case of where they're actually trying to propose it, then you look at the standards and be like, nope, sorry, you abut a residential property, so it's not permitted there. Like,
But the chair is absolutely on point that it's going to be tough to meet, but at least having it spelled out defines those things. This is our policy, this is where we are. It's in there on electronic gaming, it's in there on manufactured home parks, it's in there on all these tools in the toolbox, so that you do have clarity to your decision-making, and it's clear that you can base that foundation on something that's written, rather than, well, we don't like it. You know, that's when you get eaten alive in the courtrooms. Now, there's one area that you'll find at the beginning of 10.2, and it's adult establishments. And you might remember me mentioning at the very beginning of our project that there are going to be several uses that the state legislature actually protects, and that is one of them. Our state law actually protects adult uses, and we are supposed to have some place in our town where it actually is feasible.
Question.
Might be small.
So,
Just one poll.
so, you know, we set up the Heritage District as conditional use. And each,
conditional zoning,
huh?
conditional zoning.
Conditional zoning, yeah. And, you know, in the multi-use, say, you know, these are the only things that we're going to even consider allowing. Is that going to stand up?
Well, it is for that district, but you need these other districts identified so it doesn't look like that you are prohibiting all of these things in your whole town. So if you've got I'm just going to pick on something. I'm going to say, okay, you got an industrial district and it lists all kinds of, you know, stuff in that industrial district, but just don't zone anything industrial.
Yeah, so I was just.
That way it's clear that it falls under those categories, and there is not one, and you have the ability at the legislative level to stop a rezoning.
So, okay, so I was just worried maybe that all of this,
Yeah,
or that going down that road.
They're gonna be in some districts that are not gonna be on your map that I bring to you.
Yes.
Now, if you were to change directions as a town and say, you know, we're tired of being this, we wanna be something, you know, junkier, then we got some districts that can help it happen.
And that's where, after this process, we are probably going to then jump back into updating our land use plan. Because we're, you know, updating goals and stuff, but that's where then you also can plan for some of this in theory, if you think of a property, like for if it's, I'm not gonna use that term, for industrial, then you can identify on the future land use. I mean, it still doesn't mean that there's zone that, it's still a legislative decision, but that's then kind of that guiding document for current council, future council, whatever, that also can make it, you know, yeah. I mean, ours would be, like I said, going in and I mean, we have the base in there, but the future land use map and that thing needs to be updated. But this is the start. I mean, we're bringing it all together to make it, you know, the regulations clear and make it, the protections there for existing residents and everybody.
Even in your future land use map, you can have categories that you don't even use or designate at this time, because you always have the potential to grow. So the hypothetical theories that you grow into certain areas where that might be the thing to do. You reach over to, I guess that's Providence Road, you know, you've got a little bit of territory that fronts over into that area. You know, you've got that. but you don't have to use those land use categories on your future land use map. You don't have to use those zoning districts on your official zoning map. But you've got those things are structured so it's very clear what your policy is, that we don't have any areas that are suitable at this time. But these are the areas where those things could happen if we had areas that were suitable at this time.
Is there a definition for electronic gaming operations, like game
In
rooms?
Article 3.
In Article 3,
Yeah,
okay.
all the definitions are in Article 3.
I missed that.
I do it that way because sometimes you'll find regulations hidden in definitions, and sometimes you'll find definitions hidden in regulations. So it's best to always have all your definitions. If you're going to define a term, define it in that one location.
Rick, I have a question to your point here, and I'm referring to Article 9, something I observed, so just from your experience. When you're talking about zoning and land use, this does not affect Marvin, but I'm going to just ask a question. I remember the Golf Links golf course that's over by Ardrey and Providence in Mecklenburg County. And it started out to be a commercial development, and then they decided to put some hotels in, so you had some density living. And then they developed what would be some condos, and I assume those condos, townhomes, would be for purchase. And then they started putting up apartment homes. And I just witnessed over the weekend, I happened to drive right through Ray Farms, that's what it's called now, the Ray Farms subdivision, or whatever it is, Ray Farms development. And it was protesting all over the place. And what there were people in the streets that were protesting the heavy density housing. Because evidently, if you've gone in that area, all the vacant land that's in between all of those apartments are going to be filled with apartments, more apartments. I mean, I've never seen so much density visually. I cannot imagine how many people are on one plot or whatever development of land. When you're developing something, and this is just a general question, when you're developing something and you're looking at square footage and you're looking at this was what's going to be built, but you're going up and you're filling it with people, is there a point that you have to have accountability with people, like people occupying a zoned area? I mean, it's a point where you can't have too many people for the zoning. Is that what I'm going to?
That's right, and the districts that you'll see have density limits based on per acre in that district, okay? And let's say that you were entertaining some kind of higher density project like a I don't know, a Burkdale or something like that, and it had some components to it, then the way that it's written, it's actually written in the traditional neighborhood development overlay right now in the draft, and that's why you'll see that in some of those references, because until we land on the districts, I'm still keeping my tools sharp in the toolbox. And that particular district has an overall density per acre, and then it has sub-densities for detached, attached, and multifamily. Okay, so that you might have an overall blended density of one thing, but you might be able to slightly bump it up in small concentrations in certain areas, but not anything big. And then I've got limits in that Article 9, which is building types, where the most you could do, you're not going to see a 300-unit apartment building or a 300-unit apartment complex, unless it's maybe multiple complexes broken up into a neighborhood with public streets and parks and everything in between and betwixt. Okay, that's the way I write this, so that those big 300-unit complexes aren't going in any town that adopts the policies that I recommend. Okay, because that's always a sore thumb for smaller towns, is a single project that overwhelms and tips the scale in a town. When you got as many people living in a complex as you do in the rest of town, you know, that tips the balance in a lot of ways. And so I write it very deliberately around small towns. This ordinance that you're looking at is not written for Charlotte. It's not written for Greensboro. It's written for towns of your size. And the tools in the toolbox work really well at that scale. Okay, the thing I told you about watching last night, that I got some free entertainment, the issue was an ordinance that not only had some stuff you can't do in North Carolina in it, it was written around a larger jurisdiction, much larger than the town that had adopted it, so it had some pretty